Sociopath, scumbag, pharma bro, morally bankrupt, and pharmaceutical gangster are just some of the nicknames that the press calls Martin Shkreli today, the former head of the New York pharmaceutical company Turing Pharmaceuticals. But a little earlier, the same newspapers called Shkreli the golden child, the embodiment of the American dream and the most successful immigrant. It turns out that the gap between the love and the hatred of the American mass media is very thin, and anything can go extremely bad just by taking one wrong step. So does Martin Shkreli really deserve the world's villain title? Or was he just playing the system that was already broken to begin with? And why was he once called the most hated man in America? Keep watching this video to find out. Martin Shkreli was born on April 1st, 1983 in Brooklyn, New York, to Albanian immigrants. His parents worked as janitors in a Coney Island hospital and also in local shopping malls. The family had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Martin was the youngest and the most abandoned child. Growing up, his only friend was his neighbor, Mr. Marty, a bankrupt stockbroker, with whom Martin often played chess. It was Mr. Marty who gave him the book The Alchemy of Finance by George Soros, which really got his interest. He began to ask Mr. Marty about the game on the stock exchange market and immediately sought to put into practice the acquired knowledge by buying himself a brokerage position in the electronic trading system on the New York Stock Exchange. And while his classmates were talking about football and baseball games and knew all the stats about every player, Martin was trying his best to learn everything about the public companies whose shares were traded. He literally read everything about them and followed the presentations of new products and the personnel movements of top managers in order to predict fluctuations in stock prices. In high school, while trying to figure out the algorithm of the stock game, he became friends with his math teacher, Linda Abudi. Her lessons in logical thinking proved to be incredibly useful for his later career, so much that when Martin became a millionaire, he donated $1 million to his high school. Linda Abudi later admitted to reporters that she remembered Martin as a depressed and lonely child, and that he suffered all the time from some kind of illness, and there was not a day that went by without him taking some sort of medication. Martin once asked her about what else could be traded on the stock exchange besides the shares of computer companies, to which she advised him to choose the area that he was the most familiar with. And it turned out that Martin was very well informed about the drugs and the different types of diseases. Martin Shkreli paid his own tuition for his education at Baruch College, a prestigious business school in New York City. In 2004, after graduating from high school, he went on an internship at the hedge fund Kramer Berkowitz and Company. It was then that Martin came up with the idea of playing on the stock exchange against pharmaceutical companies. The essence of his trick was simple. Stock exchange speculators have a term known as short selling, which involves borrowing securities such as shares or bonds and selling them. If the price of the securities borrowed falls, then the investor makes a profit, but if the price goes up, then he loses money. Nevertheless, the investor will have to buy again the same type of securities in order to return them to the lender. Martin Shkreli predicted a price drop of Regeneron Pharmaceuticals that was testing a weight loss drug. His prediction was right, and a few days later, the hedge fund Kramer Berkowitz & Co. made so much money from this transaction that the Securities and Exchange Commission launched its own investigation against the fund. But in the end, they couldn't find anything illegal. After this incident, the press started calling Martin Shkreli the Golden Boy. In 2006, inspired by his first success, Martin Shkreli left Jim Cramer's company and opened his own hedge fund, Alea Capital Management, which began to specialize in the pharmaceutical market. But the newly founded company wasn't that lucky. Martin Shkreli made a risky $2.6 million bet that the market would decline through Lehman Brothers. His prediction was wrong, and he didn't have enough money to cover his debt. In 2007, Lehman Brothers sued Alea and were awarded $2.3 million in New York State court. However, the Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy the following year and thus couldn't collect the money from Shkreli. After that, Martin sold his car, closed the hedge fund and moved back with his parents to Brooklyn. In 2009, Martin Shkreli founded his second hedge fund, MSMB Capital Management. Like his first fund, Alea Capital Management, MSMB focused on investments in the pharmaceutical market. This time, Martin Shkreli took into account all of his previous mistakes and hired the best medical experts who followed the clinical trials of all the latest drugs and who needed investments. His first victim was the pharmaceutical company Mankind, which was working on a new drug for the treatment of diabetes. Shkreli sent a letter to the FDA claiming that during the clinical trials of this new drug, human subjects experienced serious side effects. As a result, FDA officials temporarily revoked the license to conduct clinical trials, and when the company's shares had significantly decreased in value, Martin had purchased a controlling stake and took over the entire company. Soon after, clinical trials were resumed, and Mankind finished developing its new drug, which was inhaled insulin. Using the same method, Martin Shkreli then bought Navidea Biopharmaceuticals, a company that was preparing to launch a new drug that would help to diagnose cancer. And after a short time, Martin discovered a company called Orexogen Therapeutics, which was developing a unique drug for the treatment of obesity. Martin realized a huge potential behind this company since millions of Americans are overweight, and so he was planning to gain the complete control over it by doing the same short-selling trick. He wrote another letter to the FDA in order to manipulate the stock's value. This time, Shkreli decided to go all in and borrowed $10 million from a brokerage company, Merrill Lynch. However, on the day that Shkreli was supposed to present his complaint to the FDA, one of the officials got sick, and the meeting was postponed by 24 hours. You would probably think that one day shouldn't make any difference, but for Shkreli, it was a disaster because according to the terms of the agreement with Merrill Lynch, he was supposed to return the shares borrowed or to give a cash deposit at exactly 6 p.m. on February 1st. And so just like that, Martin Shkreli lost $10 million, almost everything that he had in his accounts. Desperate to keep his golden boy image, Martin decided to pretend like nothing happened and started to make refunds using a Ponzi scheme. The next morning, he sent out congratulatory letters to the hedge fund shareholders, saying that MSMB made a $40 million profit on the last deal, hoping to obtain even more investment money in order to open a new company, MSMB Healthcare, that would do its own drug research and development. Investors gave Shkreli a standing ovation, and in just a week, his new company raised more than $5 million in new investments. And in all fairness, Shkreli kept his promise. Scientists working at MSMB Healthcare developed a drug for the treatment of a rare type of muscular dystrophy and also created an experimental therapy for the treatment of Hallervorden-Spatz disease, a rare neurodegenerative disorder. However, drug research and development is a very expensive process, and in 2012, MSMB was in financial difficulties again and left Shkreli with no other choice but to go back to a Ponzi scheme. Martin knew that the Ponzi scheme couldn't go on forever and that he had to find a way to make more money quick. So he founded a new pharmaceutical company, Retrophin, which specialized in one thing, and that is to buy the rights to produce already existing drugs that no one else was making, and then to jack up its prices as much as possible. Shkreli then acquired the rights to Thiola, a drug used to treat cystinuria, a rare hereditary disease, and raised its price by 2,000%. When asked about his reasoning behind the inflated price, he replied by saying that it's just an ordinary capitalism and everyone does it, and that it's not the patients who pay for the drugs themselves, but the insurance companies that make a profit from the misfortunes of people. Shkreli was right. The enrichment from rare drugs has been a trademark of American pharmaceuticals for a long time. However, Shkreli did not take into account one small but very significant implication. All sharp increases in prices occurred with the approval of insurance companies, who also receive their share of profits from the drugs. Shkreli simply rebelled against them, and the insurance companies declared war on him. Shortly after, one of Retrophin employees, Tim Pierotti, sold all the Shkreli's secrets to insurers. According to Shkreli himself, Pierotti stole more than $1.6 million from the company, and when he got fired from Retrofin for financial fraud, he took with him some documents that shed light on the true financial state of the company. An enraged Shkreli began to threaten anyone close to Pierotti and took the dispute to social media. A scandal broke out as a result, which attracted the attention of nervous investors. As a consequence, Retrofin's shares lost half of its value in 6 months, and in October 2014, investors made sure that his partner Marek Bistek would officially remove Shkreli from the CEO position of the company. What's more, the new managers of Retrofin filed a lawsuit against him, accusing Shkreli of violating the securities trading rules and also of irrational use of the company funds in the amount of $65 million. It soon became clear where the stolen $65 million went. In February 2015, Shkreli founded Turing Pharmaceuticals and then bought the rights to a drug called Daraprim for $55 million. Daraprim was an old and cheap drug that was used for the treatment of toxoplasmosis, a disease that usually occurs in patients with a weakened immune system, and particularly in HIV-infected and cancer patients who had undergone chemotherapy. This time, Shkreli set a world record by raising the cost of the drug by 5,500%, from $13.5 to $750 per pill. Considering that immunocompromised people typically require long-term treatment with Daraprim, experts at the IDSA calculated that it would cost $640,000 for a 1-year treatment. And since the drug wasn't covered by health insurance, it made Martin Shkreli famous. He woke up the next morning to the news which told how one guy decided to take away the remaining money from HIV and cancer patients. The company hired professionals to deal with the scandal, but all their efforts were nullified by Shkreli's statements. His response to the backlash only made things worse. He became known for his confrontational and unapologetic demeanor, often taunting critics on social media and refusing to back down from the price increase. He said during an interview, "If there was a company that was selling an Aston Martin at the price of a bicycle, and we buy that company and we ask to charge Toyota prices, I don't think that that should be a crime." He also said that he has investors, and the only thing that he has to think about is how to make them even richer. Shkreli went on live TV and was asked if he was ashamed at all and if he had any regrets, to which he replied by saying, "Of course, I regret that I didn't raise the price by 10,000%. And that is how Martin Shkreli became the most hated man in America. His actions earned him the nickname Pharma Bro and made him a symbol of greed and corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. His behavior was widely condemned by politicians, healthcare professionals, and the public. A great deal of people in the U.S. were hoping to see Shkreli locked up behind bars because of the inflated drug price, and on December 17, 2015, Shkreli was arrested in his Manhattan apartment by FBI agents, but not for the reason most people were hoping for. Shkreli was charged with securities fraud from his tenure at MSMB and Retrofin, where he was running his companies like a Ponzi scheme by using each subsequent company to repay investors from a previous company. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Shkreli had engaged in a series of fraudulent schemes, including using fake consulting agreements to pay investors and misrepresenting the success of Retrofin's drug development programs. Shkreli's defense team argued that he had acted in good faith and that his investors had ultimately profited from his actions. In August 2017, a federal jury in Brooklyn, New York, found Shkreli guilty of 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit securities fraud. He was acquitted of 5 other charges. In March 2018, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison and ordered to forfeit $7.36 million in assets. Shkreli's conviction was widely celebrated by those who had criticized him for his actions in the pharmaceutical industry. However, Shkreli continued to court controversy even after his conviction. He was accused of harassing journalists and making inappropriate comments during his time in prison, and was eventually transferred to a high-security prison in Pennsylvania, but was released on May 18, 2022, after serving less than 5 years of his 7-year sentence. So does Martin Shkreli really deserve the world's villain title? Or was he just playing the system that was already broken to begin with? It is difficult to say, as this is a subjective and somewhat hyperbolic designation. However, it is clear that his actions as a pharmaceutical executive and his subsequent criminal prosecution and conviction were widely viewed as unethical and harmful. But at the end of the day, the media played a huge part in turning him into a villain, and so he played along this villain image. Martin Shkreli is a very smart person, and he was playing the system like any other businessman in America. What brought Shkreli down is him playing the system in a way the system didn't like. And it is widely believed that the only reason he was investigated in the first place was his popularity. And if it wasn't for the media, the feds probably wouldn't even have bothered to lock him up.